Okay, welcome to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We had a very interesting show for you planned today. Two professors, one who's going to be talking about a CrowdStrike. If you remember that during the week, we had a system outage in terms of the planes and hospitals. We're going to be talking liability, and we're going to talk to a professor about CrowdStrike. The second professor we have on is going to be discussing the cell phone ban push throughout the New York schools, whether it's private schools, public schools, and you could really make arguments either way, but certainly cell phone use has been on the uptick with respect to students, and some could say not for the better. Stay with us. We have so much that's coming right now. Okay, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. I'm very excited today to be discussing the topic CrowdStrike with Professor Justin Cappos. Professor, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing well, and it's been been an interesting week for many reasons, politically and everything else. But one thing that we really should be talking about is the computer outage that caused so many flight delays and caused so much havoc throughout the nation, commonly known as CrowdStrike, which I think is a type of computer program. Maybe you can start us off and walk us through a little bit of the history of what this is and why we got caught with our proverbial pants down.
Sure. So CrowdStrike is a computer security company, and they're actually pretty famous for investigating a lot of high-profile incidents, like the Sony hack that happened by allegedly North Korea that caused a bunch of damage there, the John Podesta email things that all fed into the 2016 election. They really made kind of their name doing a lot of those types of investigations. And then they pivoted into doing what is basically antivirus software. You can think about it as something very similar to that, the kind of stuff that you hear that Norton or McAfee or other vendors like that provide. And they turned that into a big business where they were going and selling that endpoint protection, that antivirus software to end users who were then going and putting it on machines. And this ended up in a lot of systems that run Windows that do mission critical things. And unfortunately, when they did their updates, they weren't as careful as they obviously should have been.
Let me ask you a question. Do people pay for this service? Or is it just like a maybe Norton antivirus that comes with the computer when you install it, or you pay a little? I mean, I had never heard of CrowdStrike. So what made it popular to begin with?
Yeah, it is usually a paid thing. They've been pretty aggressive at marketing towards more like government, large institutions, things like this. Um, and by the way, your Windows system, even if you don't have any of these name branded things, it actually comes with antivirus software and stuff like that built in. Usually, if it comes packaged with some Norton AV or something, it's often just a trial subscription for some period of time. But Windows itself has perfectly good antivirus software built in. So if you're just a home consumer, you should not really be paying for antivirus. It's a little bit of kind of a waste of money, to be honest, in most cases.
All right, so let's walk us through what happened here. Was it one glitch, more than one glitch, and where did it start with one update? I mean, where did this even begin?
Sure. So there's a few fundamental problems, and then there was the actual mistake. Okay. So a nice way to think about this is, I'm just going to use a quick analogy, is yes, a developer made a mistake, but that caused the outage, but it wasn't the developer's fault. So if I go to McDonald's and I order a milkshake and the cashier hits a button and charges me for an apple pie, then that's the cashier's fault because the cashier made a mistake, and then we have to figure out how to fix that. If I go to McDonald's, I order my milkshake, and the cashier pushes the wrong button and a nuclear missile is launched, then that's not the cashier's fault because whoever had the idea to hook the cash register up to the nuclear missiles, that was their mistake, right? And so this is really what's happened in the CrowdStrike situation, is that you had a developer who made a mistake when they pushed an update, but that mistake was able to be magnified by several other problems. One of which was that when they run their antivirus in Windows, they do it in a very sensitive way that can cause huge problems and crash the system if it fails. Now, normally, if you're doing something like playing a game on Windows and your game has a problem, what happens?
You shut it off, you put it back on.
Yeah. And Windows is working just fine. If you
Right.
had a web browser open doing something else, no problem. But in this case, since they did it at a very low level of the operating system, it just completely basically bricked the whole computer until an administrator went in and made changes.
Now, from what I understand, the administrator has a big job to do. This isn't a just power on, power off button type of thing. Why?
Well, so because they failed to make it so that when their update failed, it didn't revert back to the old version, which is a very common thing that happens in updaters.
Right. It happens in my Apple phone. You move to iOS, you're up to 10.2, or in 10.1's gone, and you want 10.1 back. Can't get it back. You can't go backwards, is what you're saying.
Well, what you often do in something like a car, for instance, when you do updates for a car, usually what happens is that the car momentarily keeps the old version around in case the new version has a problem starting on the car. And for things that are really sensitive and can kind of permanently crash a system, that's basically standard practice to do that. And the fact they weren't doing that was one problem. Another problem is they just sent it out to millions of people all at once. And usually what you do is, like, for instance, let's say you're doing a drug trial or something. You don't just say, we have an idea for a new drug. Let's just give it to everybody in America. What they do is they take a really small set of people and they test it and make sure everything's okay. And then they roll it out in bigger and bigger groups before it finally goes out. And they did not do that here. And there are other failures and problems, like they just didn't test it adequately. So it's really a combination of a lot of problems that really are management at CrowdStrike's fault. It's a little bit of Microsoft's fault, to be honest, for not having a better way for AV vendors to do this kind of stuff. But it's mostly management at CrowdStrike that really screwed up.
Well, before we talk liability, let's talk about a little bit of some of the industries that were affected. Everyone knows the airline industry was affected. People were stranded, basically waiting for flights. I think 5,000 flights were canceled or something to that degree. But also hospitals and cafes, anything that had this type of software on its system was fair game, right?
Yeah, I mean, even some of the subway notifications and stuff like this, it's really just kind of shown where Windows systems are being used to do some of this mission critical stuff. Now, the good news is that most computers in the world that actually run a different type of operating system called Linux, and so Linux is much more widespread, especially in these kind of mission critical things. And so Linux wasn't impacted by this. This was really a Windows on, CrowdStrike on Windows problem that happened, which meant that we didn't have an even broader catastrophe on our hands.
Okay. People died, right? They passed away because computers were not working properly. I think you and I spoke off camera a little bit about the term proximate cause. It's a legal term which really talks about foreseeability, and it's whether the negligence was foreseeable. And I guess my question to you is it foreseeable? I know you're not an attorney, but is it foreseeable for a software company to realize that their updates have such implications that somebody could actually die if it's not executed properly?
I mean, absolutely. Especially when you're dealing with anything that's running inside of that very sensitive part of the computer that can crash the whole thing. That is absolutely foreseeable. If you have a situation like a game, for instance, and the game is going to crash and the system might have to reboot or something, that is an entirely different story. But as soon as you start going and being able to crash and bring down entire systems, then it's absolutely foreseeable. And you need to take a level of precaution that matches the level of risk that you're adding to all of these user devices.
I wonder if there's a a clause or something that you sign off on or click while it's being installed, limiting liability, which, by the way, is many times not enforceable in the courts anyway. Can't limit liabilities, especially when it comes to children. I just wonder if they were smart enough to do that to protect themselves for such a situation. Have you heard anything about that or not really?
I haven't looked into it, but it's pretty standard practice with almost all software licenses to say that we give no assurances in that regard. I would be shocked if they did not have it, since it's standard in the field.
Interesting. So where do we go from here? Do we regulate it? That's always a question. Do we get the government involved? Nobody wants the government involved until it's too late, and then everybody wants the government involved. What are your thoughts?
Well, honestly, I think that one organization that has the know-how and the ability and is perfectly positioned to make make good things come out of this is Microsoft. Because really, if these updates were going out through Windows Update channels, which Microsoft has built a lot of this QA testing and stuff into, this would have been detected and fixed a lot better. If Microsoft had better sort of guide rails about how people do AV without crashing the system and doing stuff like this, which they're the ones who really need to build better guardrails into Windows itself, they could have also mitigated a lot of the damage. I'm not trying to put this entirely at the feet of Microsoft, but there have been issues like this in the past where actually the CEO of CrowdStrike was the CTO of McAfee when they crashed, I think, hundreds of thousands of computers back in 2010. And there have been other incidents like this with AV being inappropriately trusted with Norton, Symantec, and other vendors like that were running wildly insecure libraries and code inside of trusted parts of the operating system. So I think Microsoft can clean house and do a really nice job here. Whether they need regulations or whether litigation needs to happen against CrowdStrike to make this happen, I don't know. But those are, I think, all viable options.
Well, maybe we'll have you back next 6 months and see if there's any litigation we should be looking at, from from my point of view, at least. All right, stay with us. So much more coming up on today's verdict right after this. Okay, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We have a very interesting topic, a topic that so many of us have been asking for, and that has to do with cell phones and cell phones in schools. Fair game. I have a 14-year-old child who is in school, who sometimes brings his phone, sometimes doesn't bring his phone. I don't even know sometimes. But we have here today Professor David Bloomfield, the Professor of Education Leadership, Law and Policy at Brooklyn College and the CUNY Graduation Center. Professor, thanks for being here today.
happy to be here and try to help.
It's a new world now, and I read about, statistics, and I'm really not even quite sure where to start with you in terms of cell phone usage. Maybe you can let the viewers know now, what is the current policy with respect to phones with respect to phones in New York State schools, private schools, public schools? Where do we stand? Where do we even begin with?
Well, the first place we stand is with the kids, and the kids are bringing their devices to school. Many of them, at least above elementary school age, have their own cell phones and other devices. They bring them to school and they use them. In New York City, there is a chancellor's regulation that permits cell phones to be brought into schools and into classrooms by students, and individual schools make their own rules. Some schools are permitted, if they have a policy, to collect the phones in the lobby and not let those students possess the phones during the school day. That's been upheld by the courts. There's a case called Price out of 2008, when Mayor Bloomberg tried to ban cell phones. People brought suit, the NYCLU brought suit, and the trial court and the appellate court found that it's permissible for a school district, namely the New York City Department of Education, to ban cell phone possession during the school day. In 2015, a chancellor's regulation was promulgated permitting, because the wheel kind of turned, and permitting cell phones to be carried on the student's person, and teachers would make individual decisions. We seem now to have the wheel turn once again, and people want to ban phones outright because they're finding too much distraction, kind of post-pandemic. And with all, TikTok wasn't around in 2008 or even 2015, but it is a tidal wave now. And teachers are trying to prevent students from texting and using their devices during instructional time.
From what I understand, the higher you go in grade, the longer the student is on the phone during the day. I think you could make an argument that once you're at second, third grade, it's not as bad as when you're in seventh grade, which is not as bad as when you're in 10th grade, which all of a sudden you're in 12th grade. So it just seems to be, as you move up the ladder, the cell phone usage is on the rise, and up almost to the point where I think the statistics say that one entire classroom worth of work is spent by its student actually on their phone. What are your thoughts about that?
It wouldn't surprise me. And the problem is that teachers are, forgive the pun, left to their own devices. And what we're looking for now is probably a district-wide, if not a statewide policy. What I hope the chancellor does is, if he comes up with a generalized policy, puts support behind that. Principals can't be left on their own. Teachers can't be left on their own. It costs a lot of money for these pouches that might be used for schools to insert a phone into the.
Well, how would that even work? What if a student just comes to school and says, "I don't really have my phone," or it's really tucked in their sock? I mean, kids are kids. They're going to try and get that phone into school no matter what they try and do.
Right. And so having gotten over the legal hurdle of being able to ban them, the question of how do you ban them and disciplinary measures becomes a major situation. You're also going to need exemptions for some students who, for one reason or another, depend on their cell phones.
Right, because they don't have a laptop at home, or they don't have something to be able to research the internet outside of their phone, and it would put them at a disadvantage. Is that what you mean?
No, what I really mean is that some students may need it as part of their IEP. If they're special education students, there may be accommodations under Section 504, or there may be particular family situations where that student needs to be in touch with their family during the course of the school day. And so a lot of arrangements have to be made that supposedly right now the chancellor is looking into that. The governor is looking into that. And so the logistics of a cell phone ban tend to be much more difficult than just the edict itself.
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I'd like to know that I can get a hold of my son, during his, 8 to 3:30 routine. If there's a necessary reason to get a hold of him, or that he can get a hold of me if, God forbid, something is going on in school. Isn't that really the rub, really?
Well, going old school, you can call the office, and
Right.
that will be the fallback that is announced, that if parents
But the genie's out of the bottle. The genie's out of the bottle now. We're just so used to being able to reach our kids at any given point of the day, whether it's helicopter parenting or however you want to call it, that, how free are they to begin with? So I mean,
Right. So we can expect pushback. Let's wait to see what the school district and what the state come up with. They're supposed to be listening to parents' concerns about this kind of thing, students' concerns. Their itchy little fingers won't be available for texting their friends or their families.
Somebody made a great suggestion that, the Apple Watches would be in good compromise, because you can't do so much work. You can't, really scroll through TikTok so easily and look at social media so easily if it's on your wrist. But then again, it's there if you need to text mom or dad, there's an emergency, please come and get me. What are your thoughts?
Well, my first thought is there's an equity issue there. So kids whose families can afford or decide to afford an Apple Watch rather than a cell phone will be advantaged, and those without that resource will be disadvantaged. So there are disciplinary concerns. I always worry when there's discipline that discipline isn't meted out equally. There are resource issues to be handled at the school level and at the family level. So again, it's a logistical nightmare, despite the fact that we know that addiction to cell phones does harm. It does harm to instruction. It does harm to mental health.
Listen, I'm addicted to my own phone, and I'm an adult, and I know better, and I look at it way too much. My son doesn't have the experience I have. He's even more addicted to his phone, and we, just like everybody's children, who bring it to the dinner table or bring it someplace and not even looking at their parents when they're talking to them. It's a real problem. Where do you think we're heading in New York? I know that there isn't really. I think Florida tried to ban it. I think they've given it a shot. I think California wants to try to do it too. What are the realistic opportunity that we have? Do you think it'll come to fruition?
Well, I think what's going to happen, unfortunately, is that the politicians, as you indicated, are going to get involved. Indiana has now a statewide ban, but they leave it to the districts and to the schools to figure it out. And so that's just unfair to have a prohibition citywide or statewide and not provide the resources, the technical assistance. How do you deal with all those parents who are going to want exemptions? How's that going to be handled? Who's going to be enforcing it? Teachers, principals, school resource officers? What do you do if a child refuses to give up their cell phone?
Well, let me ask you a question. What if you were the chancellor? What would you do?
I would be careful about instituting a cell phone ban, because a cell phone ban comes with certain responsibilities that I don't think the school system at this point is ready to shoulder. So I would make sure that there were guidelines, that if a principal wanted to ban cell phones in their schools, there would be money behind those pouches or the staffing needed to arrange for pockets, little shoe holders where students can put their their phones, and those arrangements have to be backstopped by the school system and not leaving parents, students, and teachers on their own.
Where do we leave it at this point?
Right now,
is there a bill that's being proposed? Is Governor Hochul looking to push the legislation through? Where are we politically?
But politically, we're in a situation where politicians are recognizing the dangers of cell phone use by teenagers, especially, and that's teenagers as well, and trying to handle it at a school level when, as we know, as you know, at home, the students are using cell phones all the time, and it's a home issue as well as a school issue. A lot more study has to be done about how to deal with this before we have a legislative ban, either at the state level or by the school system itself.
I think I would agree with that. And maybe
resources behind it, not just pontificating.
Maybe we could have you back on in the next 6 months and see where we are with the issue. It's certainly an issue that is not going away. And we appreciate the insight that you've given the program.
Happy to come back. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, stay with us. Today's verdict has so much more coming up right after this.
Only 57% of New York City high school students are college ready by their senior year. "55% of high school graduates either have no plans to attend college or are uncertain that they will ever attend. "34% of young adults don't go to college because they can't afford it. Discover what's possible. BronxNet's education programs, internships, and opportunities help engage and inspire Bronx youth and beyond to pursue their passions. Be a part of the BronxNet family. Whether you're interested in our shows, joining a class, or donating to support our mission, visit bronxnet.org to learn more.
Okay, that's all we have for today. I'd like to thank the viewers for watching us, and of course you, the viewers, for sending in all the different thoughts in terms of what we should be putting on the air. If you have an idea or anything that you think that we would be happy to have, or any guests you think we would want on the show, feel free to email me at davidlesch@bronxnet.org. Until we see you again in 2 weeks, know your issues, reach a verdict. I'll see you soon.